Hello, welcome. My name is Dr. Phil Winder, and I'm CEO of Winder AI. Today, I would like to talk to you all about UI and UX, the UX and the UI of feedback for LLMs. And so I've got a presentation to show you about some of the different trends and themes that have emerged. But I also want to touch upon how you would actually leverage and use that feedback. So I've got some ideas for that as well. So stick around if you're interested in the engineering side of things as well. So the reason for doing this talk is that I did a bit of research for one of my clients in terms of trying to gather feedback from their internal users of their LLM application, because ultimately the goal of any tool is to empower and provide value to their users, and you can only do that if you are actively capturing feedback. So a little bit of admin just before we get going. If you've got any questions, then as usual, please feel free to post a comment in the comment section of LinkedIn or YouTube or the webinar software, whatever you're using, and it should pop up on my screen. I'll release this as a blog post at some point in the future. A little bit busy over the next few weeks, but it'll get there eventually. If you have any, general AI needs or questions, then please feel free to reach out to me at phil@winder.ai. Otherwise, let's get going. All right, so user feedback in LLM-powered applications. So feedback matters for a couple of different reasons. One of the main ones is that you need to be able to understand from your users whether your application is working as they desire. And this is really going back to like a more product mindset. You need to be able to understand the ways in which your users are using your software and the issues they might have it, because if you're not providing that value, then they're not going to like it, and ultimately someone's not going to like it. It's especially important for product vendors, but equally important for consultants like me who are trying to provide value to a business. I'm going to segment the presentations to two sections: capturing the feedback and then using the feedback. I think that's kind of the most natural split that I could make of this content. All right, so part one, capturing feedback. So there's a couple of different forms, there's a few different key forms of feedback that I've seen used in LLM applications to date. This is an overview of those 5 that I've isolated. I'll go into detail a bit more in a minute about each one. But in summary, we have inline feedback. So that's things like thumbs up, thumbs down to responses that are inline in your application. We've got freeform feedback, which is like open-ended user feedback in form of text or something else. You've got kind of implicit feedback signals, like when the user edits the response, whether they manually edit it themselves or they reprompt the model to tell it to not do something stupid. And I've just realized I've got a banner on the bottom. I will get rid of that. I am sorry. And retrospective feedback is like a reflection after the interaction is completed. This is very common in like chat bot support kind of scenarios. And then finally, differential feedback. This is where you present the user with multiple options and you ask them which is the best. So let's dig into each of those in detail and give you a couple of examples. So the first one is that the thumbs up and thumbs down is pretty much used everywhere. It's very lightweight. It's nice and quick from a UX perspective. It's very, it's like there's a small impact on your UI. Also, it's very obvious what it does. It's a very common UX pattern now. So many people incorporate it. We've got a couple of examples here. We've got one from Azure at the top left. We've got ChatGPT on the right and Claude on the bottom. I think A couple of things that you'll notice about the thumbs up, thumbs down, though, is that the quality of that signal is somewhat debatable. And the main reason for that is that most users only complain. They never give you a pat on the back. They'll only tell you. I say most users. I also mean, you know, most clients and most friends and family. They'll give you criticism far more than they'll give you, you know, positive feedback. And it's the same with the thumbs up, thumbs down. So you'll see in the ChatGPT example on the right there that they've only got a thumbs down, because they must have realized at some point, you know, we don't need a thumbs up because nobody gives us a thumbs up. It's always a thumbs down or nothing. It's still an important signal, but there you go. Another thing about thumbs up, thumbs down is that it's a very coarse signal. It doesn't really give you any information about why the user didn't like it, or even if it did, you know, even if they didn't like it at all, they might just be trolling, you know. So one of the key things that you need to pair thumbs up, thumbs down feedback with is some other kind of feedback mechanism. Probably one of the most common and most reasonable extra bits of information you can provide is some kind of drop down or some kind of selection from a category to tell the back end what it was that they didn't like about it, and that helps to weed out some of the noise. It also helps to do some kind of natural and user oriented classification on that feedback. They're saying they didn't like it because of this specific category. So when you're reviewing this information later on, you can quite easily filter for specific issues, which is really useful. A lot of forms also provide some kind of free text box to tell you to allow the user, to empower the user to give even more information. And that can be really useful because it's kind of a meta conversation. You know, it's not the feedback that they're providing is not buried within the chat there. It's very obvious to the person that's analyzing this feedback later on. So the value here is that the UX is very common. It's easy to implement. It's really good for sort of metrics, and you know, you can have some preliminary kind of segmentation for concern. So that's why you see it everywhere. Okay, next UI pattern is freeform feedback. And what I mean by this is that within the chat interface itself, you can interact with the user to ask them, well, I mean, it depends on how you handle it. If you've got a thumbs up, thumbs down like interface, if they give you a thumbs down, then you could use the LLM to go back to them to ask them why they provided the feedback and capture it within the chat itself. It's very common in chatbot-like scenarios. So like on the right-hand side here, we've got an example from, let me just give a shout out to the company, Trust Mary, which is a chatbot company. They're asking the user at the end of a chat whether the interaction was helpful. They're asking a score. They're asking for extra feedback and things. On the left-hand side, I've just got a mock-up of a, you know, thumbs down, thumbs up interface with a inflammatory quote on the top there. Apologies, Python lovers. Yeah, the benefit here is that you're never leaving the UX context that the person is used to working in. So it's really nice that you don't have to force the user to switch context effectively. You can also run that feedback back through other models and other downstream models. Maybe you can enact processes depending on the decision of those downstream models as well. If you see that someone's having a bad time, you can connect them to a real person immediately, and they can take over the chat. You know, so the value of this is there's potentially less UX context switching burden, and also it's reasonably likely that if you are engaging in a conversational style, you're encouraging the user to provide a really rich form of feedback because they can just talk back to you. So yeah, that can be really positive. Okay, what's next? Editing the question response. See this much in um, many popular services, primarily because they are, the most popular services are just LLM endpoints. They're attempting to generate stuff for you. Um, in a business context, though, and in other contexts, it can be really useful to ask the user to actually give you the right answer. And yeah, even in a traditional LLM space, actually, I said it wasn't that obvious, but actually it is a little bit, because we've got an example on the right hand side here from Cursor, and in this case, I've asked it to do something, and it's generated some insane code, as they tend to do when you don't give a very good prompt. And so I've had to go in, edit it, add more information, and then ask it to regenerate. That's a really strong thumbs down signal, effectively, without there being a thumbs down button. And so you can kind of use that as a proxy for a thumbs down. But for commercial use cases, for business use cases, I think there's more. It's more okay to ask the user to do a bit of work to give you the correct answer. And if they do that, then that's obviously a really powerful source of feedback, because they're giving you the ground truth for free. So you can basically directly use that in downstream fine-tuning efforts to improve your model. So yeah, really, really powerful potential solution there. And finally, retrospective feedback. We've got the same chatbot interface again, because that is very retrospective. At the end of a chat, you can ask the user to review their interactions and reflect on their experience. So again, that could be in terms of a net promoter score style rating. It could be you could allow them to actually give like a text feedback, but it can be useful to provide like overall sentiment, or like a summary of an overall issue. Sometimes less granular than buttons and things like that, but the information it can provide can be quite important as well. So that's kind of the end of the sort of direct feedback when things go wrong. The next piece of feedback that you can do is by actually presenting the user with several different options. ChatGPT did this fairly often in the early days. It does it less now. So on the left-hand side, we've got an example from ChatGPT from a while ago. It doesn't look like this anymore. But in business context, this can be really useful, especially if you are kind of working in a new domain. You don't quite know what users might want. So you can effectively use this as an inbuilt A/B test. So really useful. Also, if you look on the right-hand side, we've got a plot from what was known as LM-Sys, now known as LLM. No, I can't remember what it's called. What they call it now. Anyway, whatever they call it, the LLM model ranking website. They have this ability to generate a response from multiple different LLMs, and you can pick your winner, and eventually you can turn those responses into ELO ratings, which is like a number that basically represents the number of times that people have preferred one model over another. So that's really powerful if you're experimenting with different models, but even with different styles as well, it can still be useful, or even like different prompts, Okay, cool. So I think that's the end of that section. Yeah, I'm just gonna just check for any comments so far. No, nothing yet. I'll have a quick drink. Yeah, so let's just feedback. Just go back and just review what we just looked at a bit again there. So different types of feedback: inline, perspective, and differential. These are all UX paradigms, I would say, but they're all attempting to do the same thing. They're attempting to elicit a reaction from your user whether it be positive or negative. And if you can do that, then the next thing you need to do after that is to gather more information about what specifically it is that they're not interested in. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So the first aspect of using and incorporating feedback is to actually turn the problem around a little bit and actually try and make it a feature of the product. The whole goal of online user feedback is to effectively not empower, but give the user the sense that they know what's going on underneath the hood. And you could do that in many different ways. But one of the most common ones I think today is especially with the advent of like thinking models and retrieval patterns and things like this, the LLM is kind of doing other things in the background. And so notifying the user that they are doing that is really useful. And so we've got an example at the top right here. This is Helix, one of our secure LLM products that we're offering through helix.ml if you're interested. And we have little like expandable sections whenever a model is thinking. We've got an example at the bottom left here from I can't actually read that citation, sorry, it's covered there, witlist.design, and they've got a couple of different like Apple style ideas for notifications about what the model is doing. So that's one aspect. Another piece of feedback that's really useful in many LLM applications is citations of the sources that it's used, especially when you've got RAG in the back end. So again, top left there is another screenshot from Helix of our citations that we generate whenever it's whenever any retrieval endpoint gets hit. So that again can be really useful to help the user understand what's going on in the background, help give the user confidence that the answer is grounded in some kind of fact. And I guess the one final piece of online user feedback you can get is actually get the user to tell you what they want. And at the bottom right here, we've got Claude has a couple of different this is a little bit old, but Claude has a couple of different options for changing the style of the output. So users can basically, filter the output to whatever they desire. So another form of online feedback. So what is valuable feedback? That's actually a really good question, because it differs. We talked about earlier that we talked a little bit about how the thumbs up, thumbs down signals were not particularly good for various reasons. People don't tend to press up, and when they press down, it's not very granular. So ideally, this is what we're trying to achieve here. So a high value signal is accurate. It's actually true. We also want to know if there's a problem with relevance, whether the response is actually relevant to the user's query or request or whatever it is. Style of tone. So this is important in some applications more than others. So for example, it's really important if you're trying to output a specific format like CSV or JSON or whatever code, you need the style to be spot on, otherwise things won't work. Tone is obviously about how it sounds. That's what Claude was doing earlier on. Format and completeness. So basically, did it follow the so firstly, again, format I guess is a subset of style. That's what I've just mentioned. Completeness, is there anything missing? Like, has it missed off a curly bracket at the end? Has it not really answered the question completely? And then finally, instruction adherence. This is kind of a more general one. Like, literally, did it do what it was supposed to do? So if you can try and design your signal gathering mechanisms to point towards issues with these things, then you can yeah, try and improve your solution so that it ticks all of the boxes. And if it does, then you'll have a very, very strong solution. Some examples of noisy signals are things like anything that's overly generic. A thumbs up, thumbs down is overly generic. Somebody typing "this is bad" is overly generic. They're not very useful because as a developer, just imagine yourself trying to fix that problem. As a developer, you don't know how to recreate it. You don't know what the issue really was. There's no chance of actually fixing that. So you don't want that. You also don't want spam. It's hard enough to kind of moderate and filter out all of the nonsense that you get already. You don't want spam as well. So there's two aspects to this. Firstly, there needs to be a little bit of a barrier so that people have to put effort into responding. Otherwise, you'll get a lot of people that are just, that don't really put enough effort in to give you a decent signal. But on the flip side, if you make it too hard, then you'll get a forced response. I've been using quite a few SaaSes recently, and things like, when I'm canceling subscriptions or something like that, they're forcing me to give them a score, and they're forcing me to give them a reason. And so I just give a spam one. It's not a real reason. It's not a real score. I'm just saying, stop bothering me. I've already made my decision. Leave me alone. So you do need some sort of bailout to all of these. And then inconsistency. If you're getting inconsistent signals, that's actually really tricky as well. You could get to a point where your product or solution is so good that actually the feedback that you're getting is kind of inconsistent in the sense that it's just natural noise. It's just the noise of the problem. But yeah, more often you get inconsistencies because there's some kind of systematic issue with the way that you're collecting feedback. Like I just said, where the example where you're forcing people to give feedback where they really don't want to. Yeah. So how do we go about evaluating and filtering this feedback? So yeah, now let's imagine that you've captured loads of feedback in some system somewhere, somehow. Like, that obviously depends on the technical implementation, but you'll have a lot, presumably, and you won't be able to look at all of them, and you will need to handle them in some way. You'll have to have a process. And so how do we go about doing that? So there's a few different ways in which you can do it. Well, actually, mainly two different ways, I guess. So the first is human review. And if you are working on a POC, or if you're working on a solution that's used by not that many people, it may be possible to do a human review. And I recommend that you do, because you will see something that the LLM won't. But basically, it forces you to learn the domain a little bit more, which every data scientist needs to do. So definitely review some at the very least. The benefit of a human review is that it can be you can get some really rapid feedback really quickly. So if you're rapidly iterating on a prompt or an idea or something, it's probably the easiest and simplest to prove the solution quickly. Obviously the major issue is that it doesn't scale. You can't look at every response. Even when you get to the point where you've got 100 responses, that's probably too many, and that's hardly any at all. So you need to come up with a more automated solution. And the most common way of doing that these days is to use another LLM. Use an LLM as a judge, according to whatever task you're doing at the time. The main benefit of that is that it's scalable. You can fire off as many requests as you want. The downside is that building LLM and building the judges, writing the prompts to decide what you're interested in and how you're going to review them is actually quite hard. It's yet another LLM based solution that you need to optimize and you need to improve upon. But thankfully, you are the user, and so you can usually provide your own feedback and improve it relatively quickly. There's a couple of others though. There's a bespoke workflow kind of angle to this as well. So one example I gave a little bit earlier about when someone is giving feedback within the chat, you can have a model, another workflow that is checking those chats to make sure that that user's okay. And if they're not, you can enact a process to bring someone into that chat to help them out. So that is an example of a bespoke workflow. Can be scalable if you do it in an automated way. But typically these bespoke workflows, they need to be developed by someone. So they have associated development costs with them. Yeah, finally, it's important to remember that there's an auditing function to all of this as well. Some, QA and auditing. So yeah, just maybe touching on the EU AI Act, for example, there's several provisions in there that make that potentially force you as a vendor to provide a way for the user to query their responses, the AI's responses, and also the right to be forgotten, GDPR, and other various sort of QA things that you might want to check, like bias and like illegal content and things like this. So yeah, the benefit of this is that it adds to your governance practices, probably improves the cleanliness of the data that you're collecting. Downside is that it's, today it's still largely a very manual process. Okay, good stuff. Let's keep going. Another important use for feedback is for monitoring purposes. So monitoring, if you've not kind of worked in a production software engineering environment before, monitoring is really important as a way to ensure that your solution is running. Basically, is it working? Is it doing what it's supposed to do? And you don't want the user to have to be the one that gets in touch with you to tell them it's not working. Ideally, you want to see it, you want to monitor it. And when we talk about AI applications, one way in which they can fail is with just a lack of quality, a degradation of quality over time, maybe. And so incorporating these signals into your sort of ML and AI monitoring is a really useful thing to do, especially if you've got a heavily used, heavily depended upon production service. So an obvious example is to aggregate all the thumbs up and thumbs down and plot that and plot it over time and things like that. Really easy to see whether things are heading in the right direction. You can attach, alerting systems to this and trigger on alerts if you see anything that is drastically changing. It also enables the use of something like some kind of experimentation method like A/B testing. You can use these signals as the signal for the test. So you can, do your traditional A/B testing and things like that. And yeah, and in the longer term, you can provide reports for the analysis of these signals over time to isolate kind of new areas which you might want to focus on, new product direction ideas, things like that. So yeah, really useful for long-term analysis as well. Okay, so what does the basic data pipeline look like for feedback data? I tried to kind of make it as generic as possible. Like, obviously, you could dive into code for your framework of choice or your technology, your language of choice. But yeah, to keep things simple, I'm just going to keep it simple. So the couple of different stages. The first one is to collect the data. You need to store that data. Usually, if we're talking about an LLM application, it's usually text. And so it's usually really quite cheap to save. If you're working with larger, with more active media like movies, audio, pictures, even, then you might need to think about it. But generally, it's quite easy to collect it and dump it. Once you've got the data, then you need to start labeling it. You need to attach all of the metadata required to actually improve the analysis later on. So, for example, there'll be things like the timestamps, any context, any user that might need to be associated with the record for GDPR reasons, or um, you know things like that. There might be some bespoke processes that you need to enact in order to label the feedback. You might need to run a model over some responses to label it as like product feedback, or other categories of feedback and things like this. The next step in the pipeline is then to clean as much as you can. Ideally, you're aiming for a really clean data set with zero noise, with zero ambiguity. But obviously, it's probably not possible or feasible. But you can probably do quite a lot of cleaning to begin with. So maybe the first step in that cleaning process might be to try and remove any like PII data. It might be to try and detect any toxic data. Anything that is, even just like if it's a blank string, simple things like that, that will help with the downstream analysis of the data. And then finally, you've got the extraction of the information that you actually need to do your analysis. So that kind of depends a little bit on the analysis task that you're doing. So if you're like building a pipeline for an analytics dashboard for monitoring, then you're going to have some process to pull out the thumbs up, thumbs down information. If you're doing some manual analysis, then you'll need to make that available to people somehow, so on and so forth. Basically, in essence, it's a traditional sort of ETL kind of pipeline, but for feedback data. And then finally, we get to the point where we can start improving things. So, we talked about manual analysis to begin with, and one of the easiest ways to improve your solution is by improving the prompt. In terms of methodologies, I think probably the most common is to manually try and improve the prompt. Just as an aside, it's really important to start developing an evaluation data set and an evaluation pipeline or scripts or whatever to try and ensure that you're not degrading the model. And also it should help, identify opportunities for improvement as well. So you can experiment more, you can write new prompts, you can feed it back into various optimization methods. So what I mean by this is there's a couple of new techniques and tools that are coming out that attempt to automatically optimize prompts. So DSPy is one example that I've come across. It's not that widely known yet, and feedback is that it kind of works out okay for toy examples, but it's a bit hard to get it working for more complicated examples. But the idea of actually directly optimizing the prompt is an interesting one. So you could kind of treat the prompt as a model effectively and train it. And then there's curated RAG as well. So actually, I think I've got an example of that coming up in a second. So I'll just leave that for a minute. Okay, have a quick drink. So when I leveraging the like a curated RAG, what I mean by that is that you can start collecting a database of good and bad examples, and you can use your RAG pipeline to be able to retrieve similar good and bad examples for a particular query. So if you know that your solution doesn't work very well for a particular example, you can effectively end-shot the prompt to improve the performance by giving it some good and bad examples. You can also kind of roll with that and start introducing some user specificity as well. You can customize the prompts to the specific user that you're serving. So if they have specific preferences, for example, like we saw in the Claude example, where they're asking for either concise or technical or wordy kind of examples or whatever, you can incorporate that in the prompt as well. If the user has said that I'm not interested in this, this was a bad answer because why? Because I don't like it. Well, you can just add that to the user specific, feedback for the RAG context there. And incorporate that into subsequent responses. So the perception from the user is that the model is learning what they like and dislike. I mean, in reality, you're just giving it a bit more context and using N-shot prompting to do that. But it can be really useful. And it's quite a fairly straightforward thing to do as well. So now if you start thinking about like more advanced methods, then we've talked about, so let's just recap again. So using feedback to directly improve prompts, using feedback to kind of optimize prompts, using feedback within a RAG context. Now we're getting to the meat and potatoes of the problem, which is using the feedback to actually fine-tune a new model. So a couple of different paradigms for fine-tuning. The first one is supervised fine-tuning. So if you're lucky enough to have an application where the user is giving you the right answer, they're giving you some sort of gold standard ground truth, then you can use that directly in a normal fine-tuning loop, and yeah, you'll be winning very soon. Typically, though, the feedback that you do get is probably just like a meta feedback about the response. It doesn't give you the right answer. It just kind of tells you how it was wrong. Luckily, reinforcement learning is quite powerful in this sense. So the way that reinforcement learning works is that you need to build and train a reward model. So basically, you're training another model to predict a numeric score for goodness, and you can do that by passing in, the feedback text. If it says this is bad, then you can use like a LLM as a judge to kind of predict what the score might be. If you've got a thumbs up, thumbs down, you can use that as like a +1, -1 kind of thing. It kind of depends on the methodology that you're using, but effectively what you're trying to do is to train a model to give you a number that represents how good a response is. And then you can use that model via reinforcement learning to fine-tune the base model. So that works when you actually have a number to work with. So if the user has given you some sort of score, like a rating, a thumbs up, a thumbs down, there's your numeric score. Quite often you don't have that. And so people are starting to turn to LLMs to act as a middleman to say, here was the conversation, this was their feedback based upon that conversation, predict what a score would be, effectively something like that. So again, it's an LLM as a judge. And then they're using that number to then train the reward model and then use our RL to fine tune the model. So that's RLAIF, reinforcement learning via AI feedback. So it's a horrible name, and I really struggle to say it, but effectively that's what they're doing there. That can be really useful when you've got quite abstract forms of feedback, and obviously it scales well because you don't need people in the loop. By all accounts, it's very powerful, but it's quite it's quite technical, it's quite complicated. RL is still hard. Yeah. Okay, so we're nearly there. A couple more slides now. Yeah, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Whilst you're improving your model, it's really vital that you're able to measure how successful you are at that improvement. So building out your evaluation techniques and pipeline and data is really, really important. You can build regression sets to make sure that you don't generate really bad problems again. And you can continue to maintain and use the same monitoring systems that you've developed already to watch the new versions as you're deploying them. We've got the differential feedback, so giving people the option, this model, the new model or old model, A/B testing, things like that. And also, it's probably worth just noting at this point that this isn't a one-off. This is an iteration, just like anything AI, even anything software. We've got to iterate through all of the potential problems until we get to the point where we've fixed most of them, because there will be some things that are just too hard to solve with the current technology. It's just not worth the effort, the price, the time, whatever. But yeah, you get there by iterating. All right, and in summary, yeah, capture feedback. Do it whenever you can, especially when you release it to real users. If you can do it in line, freeform, with actions, retrospectively, experimentally, all of these different techniques are just different ways of eliciting feedback from users. Doesn't really matter how you do it. If you go back to your sort of product mindset again, like literally just watching users use your system is the old school way of doing it. We're trying to kind of build off that. How can we see what we can improve? Then you need to use the feedback. So obvious uses are for in monitoring, and for iterative improvements to your solution, your technical solution, and your prompt, and things like that. But you can also incorporate that feedback directly via kind of in-context RAG like solutions with Nshot, like Nshot solutions, or even with fine-tuning, which would be the next step. The key takeaway is that real life evaluation data is incredibly valuable. Treat it with care, and it's valuable, especially if you're in a specific domain, because that could be the competitive advantage that you need to be better than OpenAI or Anthropic or whoever. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed that. If you would like to learn any more, then please visit winder.ai. We've got lots of really interesting articles on there. If you'd like to reach out to me to talk about any of my work, or you've got any work that you would like me to look at, then phil@winder.ai is the best way to reach out to me. I've got my V card there, which I think has got all my information on. You can find me on LinkedIn, Dr. Phil Winder, if you'd like to come and join me on LinkedIn. So yeah, I forgot to actually add a couple of further reading resources. So the first one I think is AI Engineering by Chip Huyen. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I found that really fascinating on a whole range of subjects. But it's got a chapter in there for feedback, which was fairly useful. Aside from that, it's mostly papers, to be honest. I read quite a few sort of archive papers to learn about this. So yeah, there's not too many resources on this yet. There was that website that I mentioned earlier on. Let's just flick back to it, actually. That had a couple of, if you're sort of on the more UI, UX kind of side of things, they had a really good, witlist.design. They had some really nice examples of AI UX ideas. So if you're a designer, you probably want to have a look through that. And yeah, I think I'll leave it there. If you've got any questions, then please pop them out in the comments there, and I'll get to them either now or later on. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.